invitation, especially Ahmad, of course, who was the person who actually invited me, and I've been very keen on following his work, right? I've been very interested in what he's doing and very impressed by both the quality and the quantity that he has produced, right? So I think that for those of you who have additional questions on how to publish after this seminar, of course, your colleague is quite knowledgeable about it as well. What I want to talk to you all about is not necessarily kind of the tips and tricks on how to publish, because in reality, there are no tips and tricks. This is something I hear so often. I have my own team of about 5 PhD students, and then they approach me and then they ask me, what is the golden standard? What are the tips and tricks on how we can actually publish? And I can assure you now, already in advance, there's no magic formula. It very much depends on yourself and what you actually want to achieve. So my presentation is not going to focus on giving you some type of tips and tricks type of presentation. No, I want to talk to you all about my experience with publishing in academic journals. So Ahmad already said it. Yeah, I got my just to check. Can everybody hear me clearly? If you can just quickly nod. Okay, perfect. As Ahmad already told me, I'm an editorial board member of some of our top journals in PA, including Public Administration Review, which is the #1 journal based on 5-year impact factor. And I'm also an editorial board member of other journals. But however, these are all quite recent appointments. So I've been quite successful in the past couple of years in getting my work published. I've published at the moment 25 journal articles in what we call A1 level journals, so international peer-reviewed journals with an impact factor. And I really want to talk to all of you about my experience in getting my work published. Okay, so I'm going to start with sharing my screen. I think probably in advance you might have already received the slides as well. Is that correct? Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing my screen now. Maybe I can get Ahmad, can you give a quick nod if you can see my screen? Yes, perfect. Okay, awesome. I'm getting some questions here for people in the waiting room. Let me just quickly allow them in. Voila, voila. Okay, we actually have 58 participants in the meeting and now 60. Wow, that's quite impressive. Okay, so let me do this. So, as I said, we have about 30 minutes and I want to talk about why you should publish, where you should publish, and how you can publish. Those are the 3 questions which will be central to my presentation. As you all can see from my background, I am indeed working at the University of Ghent, and I'm quite impressed. All of you seem very well groomed. As you can see from my hair, the hairdressers here, the barbers, they are not open at the moment. So my hair has exploded. So please don't mind my curls. It is due to the COVID crisis. So I work at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and we have quite a big research team at Ghent University, which is focusing on public management and public administration questions. Right? So that is my field of study, public management specifically. But I think that my insights here are applicable to those of you just aiming to publish, especially in the social sciences. So people who would be studying more management, private sector, business, sociology, psychology, and maybe also other fields. I'm not going to focus my presentation only on the public management field. It should be broad enough for all of you. So, a hitchhiker's guide to publishing and surviving, and especially that second part, not just publishing, but actually also surviving, is quite important. And I really want to emphasize this. Many people, many scholars, especially younger scholars, they really struggle with publishing. They have a hard time, they get rejected a lot, and they might become demotivated, they might become angry, they might become sad, We were seeing, I don't know how it is at your own university, but in Ghent University, we are seeing that many PhD students and junior scholars have burnouts. They have a very low well-being because of that pressure to publish, right? So it's also about surviving, not just publishing, but kind of surviving and hopefully thriving. Okay, so the first question that I want to answer is, why should you publish? I think that question was already answered to some extent by Ahmed also, saying, well, you have to publish if you want to get a promotion, right? So that's what we call the idea of extrinsic motivation. You need to get published in order to become tenured, become associate professor, even become a professor, and so forth, right? So that's kind of the extrinsic part. But that's not the only reason why you should publish, okay? What you're going to see in the next slides are, according to me, the 3 main reasons why publishing in international academic journals is important, okay? 3 reasons. The first reason is exposure. Making sure that people actually get to know who you are. And this sounds quite trivial. I mean, exposure, well, duh, okay, that you publish and that's fine. But one comment I often get from especially from PhD students, but also sometimes from colleagues is, well, publishing in academic journals, why should we do it? No one cares. Academic journals, that's only like something that a couple of boring academics sitting in their ivory tower would tend to read. These academic articles. They are not being read by practitioners. They don't have impact. This is a criticism I often hear. That's nonsense, okay? That is really nonsense. There are, granted, some scholars, some articles who might not have a lot of practical impact. But in my experience, when you publish on important themes that have a clear practical relevance, people will find your work, especially if it's published in international peer-reviewed journals. To give you an example, I've almost exclusively published in international peer-reviewed journals and via ResearchGate, which is kind of like a social media for researchers. I think many of you might already be on it or use it to download papers. It's a very interesting tool, ResearchGate. My work has been read over 35,000 times. Okay. These aren't just people from the public management community reading these articles. Every week I get to see the countries that downloaded my articles, the universities, and so forth. And it really shows how international it is. So having actual academic publications is important because it helps to get exposure. It helps to put yourself out there, to tell people what exactly you are doing. And if you do it well, and if you're inspired by it, you will have impact. You will have exposure. Okay. The second reason that you're mentioning, that you're seeing here, is the idea of, well, not just exposure, but also actual impact on the field. Not only in theory, but also in practice, right? And my experience has been that actually, because of my academic publications, I am being contacted more and more by international and other organizations. So for instance, I have worked with the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, for the past 3 years. I was part of the review team that recently reviewed the education system of Abu Dhabi. We also visited Wales and last year the country Georgia, all as part of this kind of auditing team that was looking at the performance of government in those countries. Those were very interesting assignments for me as an academic. Well, how did I get them? I didn't get them because of my matte hair and my exploded curls. I got them because people at the OECD were actually reading my work. They saw my articles. They saw what I focused on. And based on that, they said, well, this is someone who is knowledgeable on questions of government performance. So through your academic publications, if indeed they focus on important themes, you can actually also have impact. You can get contacted by businesses, governments, and so forth to advise them, to help them. Okay, so these aren't two separate tracks. It's not either you have impact or either you publish. No, through your publishing, you can have a lot of impact. The third reason that I want to emphasize here, and you're seeing these three people. Well, actually, the center person is currently covered by my big oval figure. The three people that you are seeing here are three of the best known, most renowned scholars in the field of public management. The person who is sitting most to the left, well, my left, is John Bryson. John Bryson is a professor at the University of Minnesota. For those of you who know anything about public management, John Bryson is one of the most impactful scholars that we have had in the past generation. He has basically invented the concept of strategic planning. So he's very renowned. The person to my right is Professor Sanjay Pandey from George Washington University. He has done a lot of work on red tape. And the person in the center, whose face is unfortunately covered, is Richard Walker from the City University of Hong Kong. All three of these scholars are renowned senior scholars in their fields. Why do I mention that? Because I am currently working with all three of these scholars. Mind you, I am only 32 years old. I got my PhD in 2016. So why on earth would these eminent scholars want to work with me? Why would they care? I mean, this is a question many of you probably also have. You might be reading specific journals and say, well, these are the people who are really eminent in my field. Why would they work with me? Well, if you actually have published, it allows you to get some legitimacy. They know of your work, they know what you can do, they know what you focus on, right? So it becomes much more easy to approach these people. You can actually say, you know, I want to work with you, and look, these are my publications on your topic, right? So legitimacy is a third very important thing, right? So having exposure, that's why we publish, having impact, and actually having legitimacy. Okay. So that was the intrinsic motivation part that I just mentioned: exposure, impact, legitimacy. Now we're going back to perhaps more the extrinsic motivation on why you should publish. Again, this was already said also by Ahmad in the beginning of the presentation. Well, why should you publish? Because you want to have a job. That's pretty straightforward. Academia today has become extremely competitive. It's not unheard of that there would be an assistant professor position where 30 to 40 applicants would apply. This, I mean, I'm speaking from experience. When I was working in Rotterdam, I was part of the job committee of two applications for assistant professor. We got over 40 applications for both jobs. Yeah? So you have to stand out. Well, how do you stand out? By having publications. Right? So it's very important to actually get a job or get promoted or take that next level step. Right? And this is something that you're seeing in job application committees. You see it more and more as well in the job opening positions. So when you look at some academic positions, you look at what is being requested. Well, more and more you need to have publications. Otherwise, you can't get the job. Right? And I really want to emphasize this point. It is not unheard of that PhD students would have published already 3 to 4 articles. 5 years ago, also in Europe, this was unheard of. 5 years ago in Europe, publishing, well, some people were publishing, but not that extreme, and especially not PhD students. But today, many of our PhD students, they publish, and they would have 3 to 4 publications even before going on the job market. Well, these are some of the people that you might be competing with, right? So publishing is important. The last reason, and this is hopefully again tied more to the idea of again intrinsic motivation. It's good fun. I mean, writing an academic paper and working with specific scholars, going to conferences if you can, or just having these types of seminars, it's so inspiring. It really, it encourages you, it inspires you, it motivates you. It's just an awesome thing to do. And I've had the pleasure of working with people like John Bryson that you can see on the picture, like Richard Walker that you can see in the picture. And these are just such grand people, right? So it's also not just about thinking in terms of your career, thinking in terms of your impact. It's also our identity as scientists. We want to do research. That's what we do. That's what we're good at, right? So publishing is about having fun and kind of being the nerds that we all are. I'm not calling you guys nerds. I'm calling myself a nerd. Maybe some of you are also nerds, but let's not get into that. But the idea of having fun is important. And so that's also the idea about surviving. If you are publishing or trying to get published and you're not inspired by what you do, you're not enjoying yourself, it'll be very hard to survive. Okay. So my point here is, don't just think about I have to publish. Think first about what type of research inspires you, motivates you, interests you. And if you do it well, you will be able to publish, right? But don't start to work on themes that you don't care much about, because it'll be hard to survive when you do that. So those are kind of like some of the main reasons as to why I personally publish and enjoy publishing. So that kind of answers the why question. The second question, of course, is, well, where should you publish? What should your aim be here? Let me just let some people enter the room. Voila. Okay, so where should you publish? This is a question that I often get from my PhD students. Where should I publish? And it's a very valid question, and it's an important question. You shouldn't underestimate the importance of this exact question. And what is my advice here? Well, there are already 4 things that I would encourage you to look at. The first advice, and this is something that I have definitely followed up myself, is try to aim for special issues of academic journals. Okay, so as most of you perhaps know, you have the typical academic journal. You can submit a paper and then you see what happens. But sometimes these journals, they would also have special issues. So these would be issues of the journal focusing on one theme. So the second question, as I said, where should you publish? So the idea of special issues is quite important. They are typically dedicated to a specific theme, and if you're lucky, that might also be the theme that you are working on. To give you an example, last year I did a special issue of the A1 journal Public Money and Management, which was focusing on strategic planning. So then we had some scholars who were strategic planning scholars who were also publishing in that special issue, right? So be sure that you know the journals you might publish in, follow their table of content, and try to follow them via social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, because you might see special issues popping up. And those special issues are very good ways to show people who you are, what you want to do, how you want to do it, and so forth. Right? So have a very strong focus on special issues. It's also a good way to get to know your community, people who are important in your own community. A second word of advice. So Ahmed also talked about predatory journals versus kind of like the good journals, if I can be so frank. And this is a very important thing. You should aim to always publish in a journal with an impact factor. Journals with an impact factor, those would typically be journals which would be classified via Web of Science, and it could be Social Sciences Citations Index, or it could be another one. But if they have an impact factor, they are classified in what we call the JCR impact factor. Those are journals for which you have at least the guarantee that they're international, that they are peer-reviewed, and that they follow the standards coming from Web of Science, right? So that's a very interesting way to already kind of know, is this journal actually serious? Apart from that, my second advice would be, don't overly focus on the impact factor. I get this so many times from colleagues, like, oh, this journal is #1 and this one is #2, and then the year after that, hey, this one is #1 and this one is #2, and it kind of changes every time. The impact factor, it really fluctuates in fields like management, like public administration. It really fluctuates, so don't focus too much on it. You can, of course, try to aim to publish in the top journals. That would be a very good idea, of course. But don't lose yourself in only saying, yeah, this is the top journal, so I have to publish in that one. People know what the good journals are, right? And it might be that for your specific topic, a journal which is not in the top 10 is a better choice for whatever reason than a journal that is in the top 10, right? So make sure that the journal that you submit to has an impact factor. However, don't lose yourself too much in its actual position, okay? The third advice that I want to give you, and this is actually a pretty straightforward. I got that advice when I was finishing my PhD, and we had a conference in Edinburgh in Scotland, and this came from one of the editors of one of our journals, and he told me, you know, write your article, just let yourself go, write your article the way you want to write it, and then look at your references and look at the type of journals you're actually citing. That could be a very good way to kind of understand, well, which journals are publishing in my fields, which journals have focused on the topic that I focused on. It's a very good way to kind of understand, where does the body of knowledge come from? So which are the journals that I could submit to that could fit my own topic? When I've reviewed over 60 papers for some of the top PA journals, and it's very easy as a reviewer to see that a paper has no knowledge whatsoever about what is being published in that journal. It happens a lot. You would really be surprised. You get a paper, and then you look at the paper and you say, but this topic isn't really fit for our journal. And you look at the references, you don't see the journal in there, right? So always think about that. Always think about, well, am I actually publishing in a journal that I also cite? Okay. And then the fourth advice here is, again, maybe more tied to your own intrinsic motivation. It's the question, well, who do you actually want to be? What is your community? This sounds like an easy question, but it really is not. To give you guys an example of my own career, so I have a bachelor's and master's degree in business economics. My PhD was in applied economics. So I could have made a choice that I would want to move into business administration, or I want to move into economics. But for me, my PhD was already focusing on the public sector. And I am passionate about the public and the nonprofit sector. This is what I love to do. I love to think about, how can we improve the performance of government? How can we make government think more strategically? That's what I care about, right? So that's the choice I made. I said, well, I'm going to be a public administration scholar. I'm going to focus on this specific field. And again, this is important because you have to feel inspired by what you do. And when you make that choice on who you actually want to be, what your community actually is, it also becomes easier to think about, okay, which journals, who do I cite, who is important here, which conferences do I go to, and so forth. Maybe tied to that, some people sometimes say, well, isn't it better to have diversity? To say, I'm going to visit many different conferences, talk to many different people. yes and no. I think for publishing, it is more important to get to understand your own community very strongly, very deeply. And once you have acquired that knowledge, then it makes sense to also kind of look at other fields, what are they doing, and try to use that for your own research. Okay. Where should you publish? So this is I have no idea why I added this picture, but this is basically me with my nieces and nephews. So both of my sisters have 2 children. So actually one now has 3. And the reason why I'm saying this is the following. Where should you publish is also about, again, the idea of surviving. Expect to get rejected, okay? And I know that this is a harsh statement, but that is the reality. I get rejected at least 2 to 3 times as much as I get accepted, okay? This is what you're seeing in the background is my track record at Public Administration Review, where I have submitted, actually currently 6, but at that time 5 articles. Well, 2 of them got accepted. This is the journal that's like the top in our field. So 3 of them got rejected, okay? And I've heard, I mean, people, sometimes they have 1 paper out of 4 that eventually gets accepted. You might have to submit to many different journals. You might have to kind of refocus every now and then, but that is reality. Don't lose hope. Don't think because you get a reject that your work is crap. When you get a reject, it means that the reviewers who looked at it for whatever reason didn't like it. They might not always be right, okay? They might even be wrong, but you have to deal with it. You have to accept it. You have to handle it, okay? To give you guys an example, one of the most impactful papers that I think I have ever written, this is a paper together with Richard Walker. We started with this paper 3 years ago. It has been rejected already by 6 different journals. Can you imagine? 6 different journals. But that's the way it is. I mean, sometimes very innovative work might take a longer time to get published. Sometimes the reviewers, for whatever reason, might be against you. Sometimes they might have a very good point. They might help make your paper a lot better, but you should prepare to get rejected, and that's okay. You should deal with it. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. You should be proud. You should own your rejects, right? You should kind of have a reject article of the month and just celebrate the fact that you got rejected. I mean, that's fine. That's the way it is. But, and this is a message I give to my PhD students, you have to be tough, right? So never take it personal. Never let it affect your moods. Never let it affect your overall well-being. You will get rejected, learn from it, deal with it, and that is all that you can do, okay? And be prepared to actually get rejected. And when you do get rejected, people, I know many of you have lovely families. When you do get rejected, go back home, spend an afternoon with your family, spend an afternoon with your local park, local community, whatever. It just always keep in mind there is more to life than only academic publishing, right? So try to kind of don't lose yourself there. When should you publish? So where should you publish? We already talked about. Now, when should you publish? This is advice which is actually probably better fit for PhD students, although it might also be relevant for junior and more senior scholars. But I get this question a lot. When should you publish? As soon as possible, wait a long time, the idea of slow science versus fast science. So when should you publish? What you're seeing here is the structure of my doctoral manuscript. I had the pleasure of receiving the award for the best PhD in public economics from Belgium in the past 6 years. So that was pretty cool. And what you're seeing here is the way that I kind of thought about my own research. And what you're seeing is different chapters and kind of each chapter building on each other. But the approach that I use, and I still use it today, is the so-called Scrum approach. This is an approach which is often used in businesses and in project management, right? And the idea is that you should avoid working too long on papers. You should avoid papers that take, well, let me say, you should avoid working only on papers that take a very long time. Right? So saying I have this massive paper, I want to publish it in the top journal, I'm going to work on it for 2 to 3 years. That's not necessarily a good idea, because there's still a big chance that you get rejected. And what happens then? You don't meet your tenure requirements, you don't meet your PhD requirements, well, you might have a big problem, right? So what I always try to do is I try to do both. I try to work on papers that take a longer time, multiple years, and simultaneously, I try to work on short-term outputs. So when you look at my publication track, you're going to see that I publish frequently. Every couple of months I have a new article and so forth. That's a very deliberate choice. That's kind of tied to the way that I work. So I don't just say I'm going to work on long-term projects that have one deliverable towards the end. No, every project that I do, it might have a long-term outcome, but I will always ensure that I have outputs every couple of months just to make sure that there are actual results already happening for my career. This type of approach works very well for academic articles. It works less well if you're focusing on academic books, which is logical because you're going to need more time to write a book. Right? So the idea of using a Scrum approach, making sure that every milestone that you actually have a result, so then when something doesn't happen towards the end, you still have the results for all the steps that came before it. Well, that has been an approach that has really helped me. It helps you create momentum, get in the flow. It helps you create legitimacy. It helps you avoid procrastinating. But you should also keep in mind, it also helps you make mistakes. So this sounds very weird. It helps you to make a mistake. Every now and then you're going to write a paper of which you might say afterwards, well, maybe I shouldn't have written this. It's not my best work, or well, maybe this assumption that I had or this data, maybe in hindsight, it wasn't that good or it didn't work. That's fine. You just have to be open to experimenting. So don't be afraid to fail. If you use the Scrum approach and you're not afraid to every now and then maybe have some type of failure, it's a very good approach to use to kind of build a lot of work. The second thing, when should you publish? So again, when you look at kind of my trajectory, it's very much, it seems very planned, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, publish. But it's not always just about planning everything, okay? What you're seeing here is a picture from, well, he's not a scholar, but he is a great boxer, Mike Tyson, who said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And this is also the same for publishing. So what do I mean with that? I mean that you need to have some type of plan that you're working on, but at the same time, don't allow that plan to minimize opportunities that are popping up. For instance, opportunities because of a special issue. I am presenting in this slides 2 papers that I've written. Both of them were never part of any planning. The highest one, we know the yin, but where is the yang? This paper that I wrote, it's actually my highest cited article at the moment. The reason why I wrote this was very straightforward. I was in Hong Kong at the time. I was working with Richard Walker, and it was my second visit there. And I had the opportunity to meet Sanjay Pandey. And he said, you know, I'm doing a special issue on methods in the review of public personnel administration, which is a top 10 journal in our field. Do you want to write a paper for it? Yeah, sure. Why not? So we talked about, okay, what can we do? And both of us had this frustration with how scholars were looking at common source bias, which it was a ridiculous perspective that was followed for many years. And we said, well, I mean, let's write about that. Let's write something down. So this eventually is at the moment my highest cited paper. It was never planned. It was never something that was part of a project fund or whatever. It was just something that emerged. The opportunity popped up. I could have said, hey, Sanji, I'm not doing that because I have my plan. No, I said, okay, I'm going for it. This sounds like a good opportunity. The other paper that you're seeing, Rational Planning, this was actually my first experiment. So as some of you might know, I do a lot of experiments, especially survey experiments, but also group decision-making experiments. And the reason why I got into experimental research was not because it was part of the plan. It wasn't. It really wasn't. I did a very classical PhD project funding, and there was no experiment mentioned whatsoever. The reason why I did the experiment was because I was with Richard Walker. He had a special issue coming up on experimental replication, and he told me, hey, Bert, why not submit something to that? I would love to be able to tell you guys that I was so sophisticated and I was so intelligent that I said, yes, I'm doing an experiment and I'm going to design blah, 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 blah. No, basically someone asked me, hey, do you want to do it? And I said, okay, let's see what happens. And it turned out to really pay dividends, right? So my point here is have a plan. Make sure that you think in the long term what you want to achieve, that you have long-term and short-term papers that you're building towards. But at the same time, be open to changes. Be open to opportunities like special issues, and make sure you actually scan those. Make sure that you have some type of communication system where you are following major journals, getting their table of contents, getting their mails or whatever, just to know that when an opportunity pops up, you can jump on it. So that's the when should you publish. And then the final question, what should you publish? I think this is mostly interesting for people who might not necessarily be sure what their career will look like. Do you want to stay in academia? Do you want to go to policy? Do you want to go to international organizations? So what I tried to do here was kind of think about, well, what should you publish based on your own CV? And for me, that choice has been very easy. In the first year of my PhD, I knew that I wanted to become a professor. After the very first conference that I did, I said, my God, I love this. This is what I enjoy doing. This is what drives me. This is what inspires me. So for me, it was extremely clear. But if you know where you want to end up, what your outcome is, you have to think deliberately about what you should publish, okay? Yeah, this is just, for those of you who every now and then want to see some funny cartoons on doing research, phdcomics.com has very interesting and funny sketches every now and then. I sometimes send them to my PhD students to get them to laugh a bit, right? You need to be humorous every now and then, otherwise people won't survive in this tough life that is academia. So PhD comics, keep that in mind, it would be a good way to see some of these cartoons. But this is actually what I wanted to show all of you. So this is the way to structure a 4-year PhD path or early career path or even senior career path. And what you're seeing here is, so the bottom is the starting point, and then you go up, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and you're seeing these 3 different paths, right? The first path is focusing on you want to become an academic, you want to become a professor, or you want to get a tenure promotion or whatever. You're staying in academia. The one in the center, well, you want to become a national expert within your own country or region or context. The final one, well, you want to become an international expert, an international practitioner, right? Based on where you want to end up, your choices will differ, right? So you need to, as you can see here, you need to publish in what we call A1 articles. It might make sense if you want to have an academic career. You should try to also publish in a top A1 journal. You should try to get international experience. You should try to win some type of awards. If you want to become a national expert, well, it might make sense to write a book in your own language, a policy report, publish in a local journal, give a seminar for local practitioners, and so forth. And if you want to become an international expert, well, you need to also have the international experience, but you could also focus on writing an article or a paper for the OECD or the IMF or the World Bank, right? So the reason why I'm kind of presenting this three pathway is because you should think deliberately about the type of career that you want to have. That is going to affect what you should publish. I still believe that for all three trajectories, you should publish in A1 articles. But of course, if you want to have an academic career, well, it's important to also publish in the top every now and then. Maybe also try to win an award if you can, okay? So that's kind of the different way of thinking about this, okay? This might also be helpful for those of you advising PhD students. And you could kind of use this to help them think about, well, where do you want to end up? And based on that, what becomes important for you? How can you publish? I'm not going to give you guys tips and tricks, right? I said in the beginning, I will not give you like a checkbox. Did I do this? Did I do this? That's nonsense. It doesn't work like that. But I can kind of reflect on how can you publish, especially in those A1 articles, as we call them, A1 journals, better said. Well, the first thing that I can kind of talk to you about, as I said before, I'm in the editorial board of these three journals, and I review quite a lot for them and also for others. And these are the three biggest mistakes that I am seeing in academic papers. The first mistake is in the very beginning, in the introduction of the paper. You would be surprised by how many papers do not say anything about their contribution for theory, research, and practice. I've read so many introductions, they don't say anything about, well, but how does this paper actually contribute to the field, to theory, to research, to practice? It's missing, it's not there. And it might be somewhere later in the paper, but as a reviewer, you need to read that in the very introduction. Because I can assure you, many of my decisions to accept, give a revision, or reject the paper are based on the introduction, right? You need to sell your ID here, okay? Second point, so apart from writing a clear paragraph on contributions to theory, to research and practice in the introduction, second part, know your literature, okay? That kind of ties to what I said earlier. Don't submit to a journal that you do not cite. Don't submit in a field that you have no idea who the scholars are. You need to know what has been published recently in this journal. You need to follow that. You need to really, really cite that. And this is something I invest a lot of time in. I get the table of contents of all the major journals that I follow, that I read, that I publish in. And every time that I see an article relevant for me, I would read it. This takes every week it takes a couple of hours. But it also makes sure that I very much know what is being published on my topics, and that I have very actual insight into what people have been saying, right? And again, I see this a lot where people are only citing sources from the 80s or the 70s, and they don't know what has been published in the fields. So make sure you know the recent literature. The chances are that one of your reviewers will be one of those scholars that has recently published on the topic. And we're all academics. We all have our ego. If someone writes a paper on your topic and they don't cite your work, well, that doesn't make you very happy, okay? So you have to try to please them. The final part, the third part, this is also something that we're seeing quite a lot. That is that the methods are not always as robust, okay? And I'm not talking about everybody should publish only experiments. No, I am talking about, did you invest in having a good sample? Did you do the correct analysis? Did you use the correct data? And especially, were you transparent in what you did? Okay, so it's so vital when you're writing the methods and results look at some of the published papers in that journal, look at how they do it, and make sure you're very transparent about every step that you followed, okay? I am personally a quantitative researcher. So my expertise really lies in statistical analysis. So if I have any doubts about your paper, because you didn't report some steps, that could be an issue, right? So it has to be robust, you have to be transparent. Okay? And then the final advice that I want to give you guys, this is something so by heart, I'm still a strategy scholar, right? So you can kind of see that I like these matrices, that's kind of how we think in management terms. What I did here is a very simple matrix, helping you think about, or am I doing the right things here? One axis centers, the vertical one, centers on the type of issue that you're focusing on. Is this something that is only relevant in your very specific context, a local issue? Or is this a topic with a broad global interest? This isn't necessarily about saying you shouldn't write papers focusing on local government in your region. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying here is the actual issue that you're addressing. Is this an issue that will speak only to a local audience? Or will it speak to a broad audience? Is it something global? Okay. The horizontal axis is more about how you do it. It's between competitive. What does that mean? It means that you are doing it on your own as much as possible. You want to be the best, you want to be the star, right? So you publish single author papers as much as possible. You don't want to work with people, you want to be the best. Or collaborative. You look at who good people are, and good people, not just in terms of publishing, but also actually in terms of who they are as human beings. And you work with them, you collaborate with them, okay? My perspective is that you have, based on these two axes, you have 4 types of scholars. You have the lame duck. The lame duck is focusing only on local issues and is very competitive. That's not a good strategy to choose. I would not recommend you to be a lame duck. Don't just sit on your island and only focus on your very specific context. Likely, it'll be very tough to be successful in publishing. The other one on the downside is the ostrich. The ostrich is collaborative, working with people, but again, only focusing on their own issues, local issues, not trying to look beyond the broader themes, the broader worlds that we're seeing. Then we have Icarus. Icarus is the legend of the young boy flying to the sun, and his wings were made of wax, so they melted and he fell down. The Icarus flight, it's a very well-known story. Well, if you are working on global issues, but you're very competitive, likely eventually you will burn out. You will fly too close to the sun and your wings will melt. It might be a good strategy to publish in the short term, but in the long term, you will get a reputation. You will perhaps not have as many good ideas. There will be many issues there. And then we have, as you can see, the flight of the flamingo. There's nothing more beautiful, apparently, than seeing a flamingo fly. I don't know if that's true. I've never seen it, but okay. These are scholars that focus on global issues and that are collaborative, working with people. In my own perspective, but also when I'm looking at who the best people, the top-sided people in our field are today, well, they are all these flamingos. They focus on issues that have a broad relevance, and they are very collaborative. They work with a great many people to obtain their success. So my advice here is think about in which box you belong today and how you might be able to become more of a flamingo. Okay, so that was basically it for my presentation. I think I took a bit longer than 30 minutes. I apologize for that, but I'm of course still open for questions.
To ask you a question, Dr. Bert, until now I have had about 10 papers accepted in somehow good journals, but the problem is, the thing I'm concerned about is I don't have a single author paper yet. Do you see this as an issue? All my papers have been, written by at least 2 people. Yeah. So in your part of the world, is this a big issue or what?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I used to work in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, and in the Netherlands, they really had a tradition where writing a single author paper was important. My personal perspective on that is actually it's not. I think that if you really want to have a single author paper, you could do it. But honestly, I have learned the most from the people that I've worked with. And I've written a couple of single author papers. I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I want to work with good people. I want to see what they have to say. I want to build a team. I want to be collaborative. And so to answer your question, I think that in some countries, it might be important to have a single author paper. So if you're applying for jobs in those countries, keep that in mind, right? But at the same time, don't use it as a strategy. Work with good people, collaborate with good people, and if you publish together, that's all for the better.
Okay. And one more question. In China, you know, for your paper to be counted as a real paper, you have to either be the first author or corresponding author. I know it is good, always good to be the first author, but I don't know what is the advantage or benefit of being a corresponding author. How do you view this? For example, for me as a postdoc at Shanghai Jiaotong University, my postdoc mentor, Professor Bang Cheng Liu, I don't know if you know him or not, he always tells me, Ahmad, for your paper to be counted, you have to be the first author or corresponding author. So how about this in your part of the world? Is it important to be a corresponding author or what?
This depends on the phase in your career. So when you're doing a PhD, it is important to be the first author. So for any article that would be part of your PhD, it is really important that you are the first author, that you can really show, you know, I was leading this initiative. It becomes much less important when you kind of move along the line. And for instance, at my university, Ghent University, actually being the last author is also interesting because the leader of the research team is the last author. So when I'm applying for funding, they look at how many articles do you have where you're the first author, but they're also looking at how many articles do you have where you're the last author. Because that second indicator is a sign of senior leadership. It's a sign that you as a scholar are able to get your team published. Okay? So again, depending on your phase, if you're a PhD student, being a first author is particularly important because you want the world to understand that this is strongly your work. The older you become, the more academic career that you have, it might become less important. However, in job applications, it is a very important thing to at least show that you have a couple of first authored papers.
Okay, got it. I think you have got a couple of questions. If you quickly go through the chat and pick up those two, you can answer. That's just very quickly.
A very good question. Let me see. I have a couple. I don't want to. Okay, so this is your people. Is there any specific words to use in the paper to have a good chance to publish? So I'm going to take this question as a question which is more about language. And to be very fair, this is not unimportant. So when you are reviewing a paper, if the English is weak to mediocre, it'll annoy you, right? So I would encourage people who say, you know, actually English writing, I need some extra work. I would encourage you to do either have someone check your paper who is actually a native English speaker or very good in English, or try to send it to an editing office to have them upgrade the English. Again, this is not important because you might have really good work, but because of language issues, reviewers might not be able to see that. I recently reviewed a paper which was coming from a team of Chinese scholars, and the content was actually really good. When I read, I looked at the methods and what they did. It was on pro-social behavior. It was really interesting. I was like, wow, this is good stuff, but the language was not good. So I ended up giving them a revise and resubmit, right? but the other reviewer rejected them. And basically that person's motive was the language is not good, it's tough to follow. Okay, so I would really encourage you, make sure that you do a language check before submitting a paper. We're not expecting you to be like Shakespeare and have perfect English. My English is not perfect as well, but make sure you do some type of quality check, because it might be a reason as to why they reject your paper. So I hope that answers that question. Then what is your advice to those who don't publish yet?
The advice is just publish, write and publish.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you want to do, of course. Maybe some of you don't want to have a career in academia, or you want to do something completely different. Well, then maybe publishing becomes less important. But as I said, this question was answered a bit when I talked about why should you publish. So I think work hard, stick to it, be bold, dare to experiment, have a clear plan. Yeah? Work with good people, work on global issues, and try to get published. Then, okay, so do we have a chance to write papers as your co-author? Yes, so I'm very collaborative. I work with a lot of people, so if anybody ever has an interesting idea that they can talk to me about, of course, you can always let me know. Mind you, I am really focusing on strategy and behavior, typically in a public context, right? So be of little help if you're writing a paper on 17th century, that would not be my forte, okay? If you have an idea, don't worry about sending an email. Not promising anything about co-authorship, but okay. Then we have a question here. So many of you were also saying thank you. So that's really cool to see that you appreciate what I did here, right? So thank you as well for listening. Okay, so this is a question. So in the US, the PhD students in economics, they would publish only one paper in a 6-year program. And some US journals would only accept papers that have a US-based co-author. Okay, so that's 2 questions. The first question, this is true. This isn't only the case in economics. So in the US, interestingly enough, the PhD system is very different than in most European countries. So to give you one specific example, in the US, you would typically start with having 2 years of courses, and then have 2 years of writing up the PhD. In Europe, you start your PhD from day 1, right? So you have to follow courses, but those courses, you can spread them over all 4 years. So this is true. In the US, you will often see that they would only have 1 paper, and they would still be able to get a job as an assistant professor, right? And they would have a lot in the pipeline, okay? However, I have been in committees where US young PhD students applied, and that was really a disadvantage for them. When we were comparing them with other European scholars, other European PhD students, we often found that those European PhD students, not all of them of course, but some of them were publishing a lot more, okay? So it's true what they're saying here. In the US, that would be very normal to not have any publications during your PhD, or maybe just 1, and then work for it as an assistant professor. But this is quite different in Europe. Concerning the second question, so US journals that would only accept papers of American co-authors, those would be, you don't want to publish in those journals. Okay, that's it, very honestly, you don't want to publish there. If that is an editorial policy, then I would encourage you, run far away and consider a different journal, because that's nonsense. It's also blatant discrimination. So don't go there. Okay, then we have some thank you. Someone said 2 heads are better than 1. And that's kind of saying that collaboration is important.
Not necessary always.
Not always. Sometimes it can be.
Yeah.
So there's a question here: how can we focus on quality more than the quantity of our papers? This is a good question. So you have to try to balance both. You need to have enough papers, so quantity, yes, but you write good papers, so quality. And how do you balance both? To be fair, my strategy has been also here So collaborate with renowned scholars. So they can help you achieve the type of quality you want to achieve, while at the same time still writing enough papers. Okay, so talk to people. If you want to make sure that what you're writing, even if it gets published, is actually something that makes sense, talk to people, talk to scholars, go to a conference, talk to practitioners, right? Get your peer review before even submitting the article, okay? This is something I started in Ghent in October, and I'm really trying to stimulate now. I'm really trying to get our young scholars especially to read each other's work, give comments on what they're all doing, because you need to kind of start up this peer review even before submitting to make sure the quality is high enough. Okay, so someone, how to publish a lot of papers to read more, or, well, I would definitely say you have to read a lot. You need to be creative, you need to have good ideas, and again, you need to work together with a lot of different people. The best way to maximize your outputs is by building teams. What is the reason why teams were invented in the first place? Because a team is able to do something that you cannot do as an individual, right? So think about that for instance. If you want to have a lot of publications, if you go at it alone versus you build up strong partnerships, you build up strong teams, there will be a massive difference in the amount of output you can generate. Okay, yeah, let me see if I have missed. Oh, this is an interesting one. So how can you find a gap? And how do you know where to begin? This is a very good question. And I didn't answer that in my presentation, but it's a very good question. It's also something that a lot of people struggle with. My approach, not saying this is the only approach, but my approach is the following. When I want to write something about a specific theme, I'm going to look for recent literature reviews or meta-analyses on that subject. And I mean recent, right? You don't want to read a literature review that's 20 years old. And I would try I would read those articles first and identify, well, what they're actually saying, which gaps are there at the moment? What is this meta-analysis showing, right? So focusing as a first thing, thinking about, okay, this is a topic I want to focus on, but now how? What is the gap? Look at recent literature reviews, see what they have been saying, and try to identify the gap based on those. Meta-analyses are particularly useful for people who have a more qualitative background, but general literature reviews also work. And you even have special journals for that. There's this new journal in PA, it's called Perspectives on Public Governance and Management. Yes. Which is really publishing conceptual literature pieces. In management, we have the International Journal of Management Reviews, which is also doing that, right? So that would be a very good starting point. Okay, and I think we're moving towards the end. Yeah. Okay, this is a really, really good question. So when you're applying for a job and when you have publications, will people only look at where you published, or will they actually read what you published? I'm going to be very fair here. I think it's probably the first. People will not read what you have published. In some applications, you need to also submit a paper, okay? Then they will read it. They will read that paper, definitely. But I mean, in my case, for instance, I'm currently at 25 A1 articles. If I would apply for a job somewhere, it would take them a lot of time to actually read that stuff. So what I typically ask then is they look at, okay, how many do you have, which types of journals, and they make their mind based on that and based on the theme. And they would also ask you to submit a working paper or something like that, right? So to be very honest, again here, when it concerns what you've already published, it is unlikely that they will actually read it. They will probably be triggered more by where you published it, but they might ask you to submit a working paper and hopefully they would read that, especially when it's an appointment as an assistant professor. This becomes much less important when you're becoming an associate professor or a full professor. Okay. So someone asked me if I've published in local journals already. is it a problem or difficult for me to publish in journals with an impact factor? It could be. I know that this sounds pretty harsh, but it could be. In Belgium, for instance, the expectations from local journals are completely different than those of impact factor journals. And I have seen some of our faculty who are able to publish a lot in those local journals, but they cannot publish in those impact factor journals. So they are really two different worlds. So don't use the same way you write for the local journal and then think I'm going to use the same style and same data and same everything and publish in international journals. That's not a good strategy, okay? Okay, so someone is saying here, according to the Kurdistan regulations of academic promotion, the first author article looks better and is compulsory sometime. What is your suggestion to our Ministry of Higher Education? Good question. I think it would make more sense to ask people to explain their contribution to a paper than to only focus on the place that they are in. Imagine that you always publish in alphabetical order and your name starts with a Z. Well, then you have kind of a problem. You're always lost author, right? And I know some people who have this frustration, by the way. So I would probably advise them to don't focus too much on the place of the author. Instead, ask them to explain their contribution to the paper. That's much more important. How did you actually contribute to this paper? And what did you do? This is something I'm seeing more and more. So in job applications, I was asked to do in a research project. I was asked to review a research project just a couple of weeks ago. And they're really asking people to explain their contribution to publications. So this would make sense more, I think, than just look at the place they're at. Okay.
There is a really good question by Serbaj Hamza. If you can read it and please have your opinion about it.
So how does the place of your location affect the approval of your paper? Place of your institution. So if I'm reading this correctly, the question is, where you are working at, is that going to have on whether or not, okay, it should not. It should not. So if you submit to a top journal, it should be double-blind peer-reviewed. So that means neither you nor the reviewers know who you are. This isn't the perfect system. Sometimes, you see a paper and you kind of know, well, there's only one person doing this. But this should not be a problem. And I am seeing in many fields that many scholars from all over the world are publishing. Of course, there's still a dominance, US, EU scholars, that is true, but it should not have any effect. If the quality is good, where you're at doesn't matter.
So if you give me a pause, Bert, in support of your speech, I submitted a paper to IPMJ, and you know the editor Steve Gilman from Harvard University. When my paper got conditional acceptance from the reviewers, believe it or not, the editor was more happier than me. He said he will be very from Kurdistan. And I currently have a paper and the second round review at PAR, Public Administration Review. There were 3 reviewers, and there are 2 co-editors. Both, all of the reviewers and editor were really happy to see somebody conducting such a somehow good research from a mediocre, from a not very well-known place like Kurdistan. So I strongly supporting that if the quality of your work is good, they don't care where you are or who you are, because of course they don't care about who you are because they don't know you. The process is blind. So the most important thing here, I think, is the quality of your work.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So it shouldn't, and some journals like Public Administration Review, so I'm on the editorial board of PAR, and this is a journal that is really looking for articles from all over the world. So
Yes.
you say it can even become an advantage if you have data from a place in the world that we don't get to have much data for. So yeah, you're exactly right. What you're actually writing about, that really matters the most. Okay, so is it possible to publish a paper without having a theoretical background or applying it? So if you want to publish an academic article, this will be very tough. Having no theory in there, I don't know how that would look like. So it wouldn't be theory testing, it wouldn't be theory building, it would be just kind of like maybe more a report. You could probably publish this in some type of policy paper or something, or policy report. It would be very hard to publish it in a scientific journal, and rightfully so, because the reason is, look, what we do as academics, it always starts from theory. This is what sets us apart from consultants and other types of experts. We are strong in theory. So we think about why is something occurring and what can we learn from that. For us, the why question always matters. And if you don't have theory, well, you can prove anything with data. You can prove anything, right? So that's why theory is extremely important, whether it be theory testing or theory building. Not having that, yeah, I wouldn't be very enthusiastic about a paper without any theory. Okay, so we have...
Excuse me, we don't have much time left. Maybe you can probably just pick up some of the questions which you think are really important. All are important, but we don't have much time left. So just be quick.
Okay, so let me just scan one. So here, yeah, your recommendation for beginning researchers, I think you kind of saw in the presentation as well, right? So be tough. Don't be afraid to get rejected. Stick to it. One of my biggest mentors ever is John Bryson, and the man is 73 years old, and he told me, and I really want to share the story with you, and I know we don't have much time, so that'll probably be the last thing that I'm saying, and it might answer many of your questions. Recently published a paper in PAR, which was a meta-analysis on strategic planning. And that paper got awarded the Lewis Brownlow Award by the American Society for Public Administration. I was one of the first Europeans to win that award. And 2 years ago, many people told me, don't work on strategic planning. It's old, it doesn't work, it's not relevant. So John Bryson, he told me the following. He said, even if the world does not agree that your topic matters, if you're inspired by it, if you believe it matters, stick to it. If you do it well, the world will come around. And I think this is a vital message that I want to share with all of you as well. Be bold, dare to experiment, dare to fail, and don't just say because someone is telling you this is nonsense, don't lose your ideas, okay? Stick to it, and hopefully they will turn around in the end. So that's, I think, my final answer.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Bert, for allocating your valuable time, and thank you for all our attendees.